Remember that we are doing parts of 50 through 54 for ecology. And so chapter 51 is about behavior. And so that's why it's called animal behavior. But you'll see that as we go through this, we'll talk about what kinds of things trigger animal behavior. And I throw in, guys, some plants as well. So, and plant behavior, not necessarily behavior like animals, but they have responses to things going on in their environment. All right, so behavioral ecology, the study of the ecological and evolutionary basis for animal behavior. So, evolutionary basis, there is evidence that some behavior is genetic. And so therefore behaviors that help with survival are behaviors that are more prevalent. And so behavior ecology, when we're looking at organisms and their behavior, we look at how, and so how they do the behavior, and then why they're acting the way that they do, and what's the explanation for the animal behavior. So some animal types of behaviors are due to environmental cues, things going on in the environment that can actually trigger, we actually can have a physiological response to cues in our environment. So what does that mean? A physiological response is a change, like in us, in our body, due to things going on in the environment. So I'm going to give you some examples of that. So in animals, internal and external signals regulate a variety of physiological responses that synchronize with environmental cycles and cues. So we'll talk about examples with changing seasons, so on and so forth. Did I go too fast? All right, so let's look at an example of this, behavioral rhythm. Some animal behavior is affected by the animal's what we call circadian rhythm. Anybody heard of this before? A few people. A daily cycle of rest and activity. Maybe you've learned about this maybe in psychology? Yeah? So the rhythm persists in constant conditions with a period of about 24 hours roughly for humans. And so of this rest and activity. So we have this circadian rhythm where we produce at certain times of the day. So at night our body produces a hormone called melatonin. And melatonin, as it increases in concentration, induces sleep. And so therefore makes you tired and so on. And then that level of that melatonin decreases after so many hours, and then we have a wake cycle. And then we have that in a constant 24-hour period. This circadian rhythm is, it says here, persists in constant conditions. So if you put a human in constant darkness, they will still have a circadian rhythm. It might deviate a little bit from that 24-hour period though. Actually, when humans aren't exposed to the natural day and light cycle and are just exposed to darkness, it actually increases a little bit more than 24 hours, but you still have that period where you increase the melatonin and then decrease it. So you still have that same rhythm without the external cues, which tells you that there's something genetic about that circadian rhythm that's controlling that. But our circadian rhythm can sync with environmental cues with night and daylight. And so therefore, we live in the Eastern time zone. Other humans live across the earth and it's nighttime right now. They have a different circadian rhythm. We both have circadian rhythms, but our rhythm is synced with external cues from the environment, the light and the dark. And so, so we can slowly sync our circadian rhythm. If we were to move across the earth, it would change slightly. So, and this is what causes jet lag. How many people have had jet lag before? All right, when you cross time zones and you're in a different time zone, you're supposed to be, sleeping and you're wide awake, or vice versa, because of the various time zones. And so what happens is we're in the Eastern time zone, so our circadian rhythm is synced to increase the melatonin and so on at a certain time of the day, linked with night and so on. And so we have this circadian rhythm. When you go on a vacation, let's say to California, there's a 3-hour difference, and you can get jet lag. And so because your body is still on that circadian rhythm of the Eastern time zone. So what happens is when you go on a vacation, and it's only a 1-week vacation, that's not enough time for your circadian rhythm to sync with the external cues, and so therefore you have this jet lag. But if you were to move to California, you wouldn't be in a constant state of jet lag. Your circadian rhythm would adjust to that, and so that's what that means. All right, but that does persist no matter if there's light or darkness.
Isn't jet lag a lot worse when you go instead of east to west, west to east?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
It kind of varies on the person too.
And
yeah.
how much you travel, but like I thought it's always easier to stay up longer than have to go to sleep earlier.
It is. Yeah, it can be. Like you said, I think it depends on the person, but in general, probably. All right. Other behaviors that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth and later on in the notes. Migration and reproduction are linked to changing seasons, and changing seasons, we usually get differences in daylight and darkness, and so the hours and so on. So those are common seasonal cues that trigger different behaviors in different seasons. And so we'll look at migration and reproduction a little bit here. So we just looked at animal behavior and being affected by circadian rhythms and so on. I want to look at plants also have responses to environmental cues, just like we do. And so plants actually have physiological responses to light. And so Charles Darwin, we know him from evolution, right? Well, he not only did some work with a lot of work with evolution, but he did some experiments with plants as well. He's a busy guy. And his experiments were on phototropism. Phototropism is a plant's response to light. And what he noticed in the sun is that a seedling growing would bend towards the light. And he also noticed that only at the tip of the plant, the coleoptile is the name of the little baby plant, was present. Anybody ever see plants grow towards the light? All right. So they're growing towards the light. We can talk about why that is, because if they're growing towards the light helps them to do what? Grow by photosynthesis. They're going to do photosynthesis to make glucose, which then gives them energy. It's the energy source to do cellular respiration, to do all the things that it needs to live. And so they noticed that the tip, something about the tip of the plant was important. And so they made a hypothesis that a signal was transmitted from the tip to the part of the plant that was elongating. So let's look at their experiments and what they did with this and how plants respond to this external stimulus, which is the light. So here's their little seedling. Here's their seedling, and here's the light coming in from the left-hand side. And you can see that the seedling coming out of the seed here on the ground here is bending towards the light. So if we look at this box here, this shows you what the cells are doing to cause the seedling to bend towards the light. So if we look at the size of the cells, do you see the size of this? Oh, and I forgot that you don't have this labeled. So I see some people writing, so I'll give you a second if you want to label that real quick, and then I'll talk about it so that you can pay attention. so they found that as the light's coming, this is the illuminated side getting the light, and this is the side that's shaded, not getting the direct light. And if you look at the size of the cells here, when the plant bends towards the light, the cells aren't dividing. What's happening is the cells actually change shape. And if you notice here, do you see that these cells on the shaded side are much longer than the ones on the side receiving the light? So something about the light coming in from the left causes the shaded cells to elongate. They actually become longer. So if my two hands were either side of your shoot here, and so they're equal sizes at first, and then the light comes in to the left here, what happens to the shaded side is these cells here become longer. So as they become longer, they elongate like this. These guys stay the same size, and that causes them to bend, the whole thing to bend towards the light because the elongated cells on the opposite side. And so that's what we have there. And so we'll come back to this and talk about, we're going to talk in the next few slides about why that is. What's triggering those cells on the shaded side to actually get longer, which then is good for the plant because it's bending towards the light. So some other things were done. So Darwin and Darwin did this experiment where they took 4 different shoots, and so it tells you underneath them what they did with them. So I'll give you a second if you want to write those down.
Oh man, come on.
Okay, so they cut off the tip. So the light source for all 4 of these are coming in for the left side. So they cut off the tip, the plant grew straight, even though the light is coming in from the left-hand side. So that's telling you that maybe something to do with the tip is important. So then they left the tip intact here. So the tip is still there, but it's covered with a cap that it says opaque cap, which means that the light can't get to it. So the tip is intact, but the light can't get to it, and it still doesn't bend towards the light. It's still going up and down. So then it's covered, they take the same one, and instead of the tip being opaque where light can't get through, they use a transparent one that the light can get through, and now it bends towards the light. And then lastly, they left the tip intact and covered it up at all, but covered the base of it so that the stem of it doesn't get any light and it still bends towards the light. So what they're learning here by cutting off the tip and it doesn't bend is that it's important. Something about the tip is causing probably the bending. So the tip is intact, but now if you cover up the tip, and it's not getting any light, it's not just the presence of the tip, but that tip has to have exposure to light. So when it has exposure to light, that's this one here, then it can bend. So not only the tip has to be present, but it also has to be exposed to light. And then lastly, how do we know it's the tip and not the stem? And that's what this is, to show you that it's the tip, and it's still, when you cover up the base, it still bends towards the light. So that's what they did. So something about the tip, and they hypothesized that it produces a chemical. And so in comes Peter, Boyce, and Jensen, hypothesized that the signal was an actual chemical that the tip makes. And it was mobile, so it moves. And so this is what he did. So we have the two plants. I'll give you a second, you can write underneath there. It says tip separated by gelatin block. Tip separated by microphone. Okay, so let me explain what they did here. The light source was still coming in from the left. They actually cut the tips off of both of these, and so it looks kind of like it's growing through this block, but what they did is they cut the tip off, removed it, put a block, and put the tip on top of the block. And the difference between these two is what the block is made out of. So gelatin is what's found in Jello that makes it harden, all right, and give that kind of texture. So this gelatin block is porous, which means things can get through it. And then mica is a mineral, so it's like hard and like a rock, so things can't get through it. So these are not, this is non-porous. That's what's important about that. And so when we're looking at this then, they were trying to say, okay, if the tip makes a chemical, and we have a porous block, that chemical can go through the porous block and go to the tip, through the from the tip, be made in the tip, go through the block and communicate with the cells and cause the cells to elongate. On this particular picture, what side are they elongating, the left or the right? The right-hand side, right? And then in here, so this proves here that you have the same idea here, but you have a solid block in between there. And so even if this produces a chemical, that chemical can't get to the stem, and therefore the cells can't elongate, and that's what we see here. So that helped to prove that there's something being made in the tip to cause the elongation and therefore the bending. And they later figured out that this is a molecule that they've named auxin. This is a plant hormone. We have hormones, plants also have hormones. Remember, a hormone by definition is something that's made in one spot and moves and causes a change to happen in another spot. And so in this case here, the hormone is made in the tip of the plant and travels to the stem and causes a change to happen. So then in their last experiment here, shows that the effect of auxin. So what they did, you have to write this. Do you have any? No, you don't have any writing. Okay, I'll give you a second. So they cut off the tip here, of a plant and put it on an agar block. Agar block is porous as well, like gelatin, it's just a little denser, not as flimsy. And so they put it on there and exposed it to light so it begins to produce oxen. So the pink here is oxen. And so then that oxen diffuses down into the block. So this has this chemical here, this is oxen. And this block here contains oxen. So now they have these gelatin blocks that have this hormone in it. And so then what they did is do some experiments. So notice here in this experiment there's no light, so there's no light source. So we're going to see just specifically the effects of oxen on the bending of the plant. So here's your control. There's two controls here. They cut off the tip, does not bend. Cut off the tip here and put an agar block without oxen. So to see what's the effect of just the agar block. No bending. Now notice here that they put the agar block on it so that it lays equally over the whole area of the tip. And so the oxen goes down on all sides and through the stem equally, so it diffuses down equally. And what happened, notice here, this is the original height, it grew straight up. Why is that? When oxen causes the cells to become elongated and become longer, and so then because it's equal, the concentration on all sides, all the cells get longer, and therefore it grows straight up towards the sky. And so then what they did is that was interesting. So then they offset it. They took the agar block and they offset it to the right and to the left, so that oxen only went on either the right side or the left side. And they noticed that the bending occurred in the opposite direction. So what's happening here? The oxen on the right side is causing the cells on the right side to do what? Elongate, right? And therefore it would bend. So it's bending that way as if the light is that way, and the same thing goes on with this one with the left-hand side. So therefore the direct cause of the bending is the oxen, but oxen is only made when what triggers the production of the oxen? The sunlight. All right, so if we go back to this original picture we looked at, this one, we can write some things about why this is occurring. So here you have the light, and it's bending towards the light. So now we're going to write a few things about what's actually happening here. So what part of the plant's really important here? The tip, right? So the tip, when the light hits the tip, what's it going to start doing? Producing oxen. Now, does the tip produce oxen equally, do you think, on all sides? No, it only produces oxen on what side? The shaded side. So therefore, this part right here, all right, the shaded side of the tip produces oxen. Now what happens to the oxen? It goes down on the shaded side. So it goes down and diffuses down the shaded side and elongates the cells on the shaded side. So the shaded side of the tip produces oxen. The oxen diffuses down the shaded side. Elongating the cells. Elongating the cells. And when it elongates the cells just on the shaded side, that causes the bending towards the light. So it bends towards light. Yes?
So, does this happen, how does this happen with like a normal day? You know, obviously the sun comes from one side of the sky early in the morning, but by the time
Right, so it balances out. So then you're right. The position of the sun goes, here. So if you get it on this side, and then it goes up here, and so on. the oxen balances itself out, and so therefore eventually you get it growing straight up. Alright, but if you have a plant that needs a lot of sun, and how much sunlight each plant needs is different too. So there's that variable. But if you plant a plant that needs bright sunlight, and you plant it close to the house that's shaded, you'll see it like growing out almost horizontal out, and so that is affected differently. Yes. Okay, so that's just an example of plants, and they have a physiological response to environmental cues as well as animals. And so let's go back here. All right. So continuing on with animals and the responses to environmental cues, behaviors. So we have physiological responses, hormones and so on produced, but we also have behaviors that are triggered by environmental cues and that are vital to reproduction, natural selection, and survival. So we're going to look at some of these behaviors. The first one we're going to look at is migration. So I mentioned it before, so we're going to look at it a little bit more in depth. So different things in the environment can trigger movement in a particular direction. So the definition of migration is a regular long-distance change in location. So regular, it happens, yearly or in response to a change in season, and it's a long-distance movement. And so how do the animals know where to go? How do they orient themselves and so on to trigger this migration? The position of the sun and their own internal circadian clock, so they can look at the position of the sun to orient themselves for migration. Some organisms use the North Star, the position of the North Star. This is especially important for like nocturnal animals, animals that are active in the nighttime. So using the sun as a compass kind of would be difficult for them. So they use the North Star as a kind of fixed position. Some organisms they found use the Earth's magnetic field as well. The Earth's magnetic field, they found like certain birds do this. They've actually done some studies and found in the bird head, there's actually a magnetite, which is allows them to sense the Earth's magnetic field and therefore give direction. And so they've done experiments with them, like putting magnets on the bird's head to disrupt the magnetic field, and it does disrupt their migration pattern. All right, and so on. So there's a lot of study being done about where these like magnet receptors are. They're studying the eyes, inner ears of the bird, and so on to figure that out. So the Earth's magnetic field can give direction as well.
And then I heard with like ants, people thought it was magnetic fields for a long time, and it's for some of them it might still be. But I remember one person did an experiment where they literally took 1,000 ants and put little stilts on these ants. Had them, so they would walk away from the mental image. Yeah. They would walk away from the colony. They would collect some, put stilts on them, and have them walk back. And what they found was they would overshoot the colony. By over half the distance. So they count their steps as they're walking, with the collective.
Oh, to know where it's
Yeah, to know where. So if you have stilts, obviously your stride is going to be longer. And if you count the same number of stilts, you're going to be.
Oh, that's interesting. I have not heard of that study.
Yeah, which is just incredible how ants can count.
In my mind, trying to think of the logistics of putting a stilts on ants. That's a job I don't know how you would go about doing it. You'd have to put them asleep for a little bit.
Yeah, I would imagine, because they would squirm.
Yeah, and then wake them up. Well, there's chemicals that you can, you can do that for fruit flies. You can put fruit flies asleep for an hour, and so you can look at them, and then they wake up. Yeah. All right. So moving on here with migration, other things that affect migration is what we call the photoperiod. So photo is referring to light, period, a certain time range. As the seasons change, we get different lengths of days. So longer days in the summer, shorter days in the winter can cue some animals to migrate. Sometimes other things play a role in that. Like I put here, less sun usually means lower temperatures. So sometimes it's hard to determine, is it the longer days in the summer, or is it the actual different temperature in the summer? Sometimes with the seasons changing, when the temperature changes, precipitation also changes. And so many places have distinct wet and dry seasons, so those can also be triggers. And sometimes it can be a combination of all of those things that can trigger the migration and movement of the organism. So the length of the days, and so on. I want to, before we go on here with the photoperiod, I want to have you take a look at the single sheet of paper that you picked up today, because I want to show you that plants also have reactions to photoperiod. We're just going to look at the top picture on this. Notice it says photoperiod in plants. And so this is what it looks like, the picture. Let me explain here what we're looking at. For flower, we're talking about flowering plants. Certain flowering plants are called short day plants, and certain flowering plants are called long day plants. So let's look at the short day plant here and look at what these bars are. So each bar represents a 24-hour period. And the yellow in mine represents the amount of time of daylight, and the gray represents the darkness. And so they did experiments with these flowering plants. And so when the short day plant here, they noticed that when you have a long day and a shorter night, that the plant didn't flower. But if you change that and flip it and you have the longer night and a shorter day, they did flower. Hence the name short day plant, because they flower in short days. And so these are plants like native to Michigan that would grow when the days are shorter. When are the days shorter? Like fall, all right, as the days get shorter. We don't have really flowering plants in the wintertime, but it gets too cold. But so we call these short day plants. So then they wondered, all right, with these flowering here, are they flowering in response to a short day, or are they flowering in response to a long night? Because both of those things are true. How do we know it's actually a short day? They assumed for a long time, that's why we call them short day plants, that it was because of the short day. So what they did is they did an experiment. And so what they did is they kept the day the same. And then the night, what they did is flash a light, and just in sometime in that dark time. So it's just like it's complete darkness, and they just had just real quick flash a light, turn the light off. What that did, it seemed to interrupt that long night. And notice here that it didn't flower. And so what we have here is they think that it was interpreted, instead that flash of light interrupted the dark, and so therefore it was like they had two short nights, all right, instead of one long night. And on the flip side, they tried it with the light during the day. Obviously this isn't it's not outside because you can't control the sun, so they were doing this inside here. They actually flashed or turned off the lights in the middle here to see if that played a role, and it didn't seem to. And so what this did is told them that it's not really the length of the day that's triggering the flowering, it's the length of the night. All right, and so more realistically, they still kept this name, short day plants, but realistically, what should we call them? Long night plants. It's the long night that's triggering them to flower. And sometimes we can play around with this, like we use this to our advantage, like to cause flowering to occur when we want to, or to delay flowering. So for instance, like mums. Do you guys know what mums are? They're flowering plants that they're called a short day plant. They usually flower in the fall, where the days are shorter, and so on. And so well, what they can do is they can trigger it to flower at different times of the year, or stop it from flowering if they want, by controlling the length of the night. So if they want it to flower, like for instance, let's say we want the mums we plant the mums and we want them to flower, let's say for Mother's Day coming up in May. So what you want to do, what you would do is then the trigger to flower is in the place that you're growing them, you would make sure that you had long nights and short, so you expose it to light for a shorter amount of time. If you wanted to stop it or delay the flowering, and you would interrupt it with a flash of light, the light, and so you have short nights, and therefore it would delay flowering. So you can delay flowering by interrupting the night with flashes of light, and then you stop those flashes and give it a long night when you want it to flower. And therefore you can take any plant that way and determine when you want it to flower and when you don't. Then they can sell them in the stores, whatever. All right. And so on the flip side, we have long day plants where, just like it says here, they flower with a long day, a shorter night. When they're given a shorter day, they don't flower, longer night. And then when we interrupt though, when we look at this and interrupt with a flash of light, notice here that's like 2 short nights, then they flower, and so that's because they need the short nights, it's the length of the night, remember, and so really instead of long day plants, we would call these short night plants. And so notice this line here is the critical, it says critical dark period. So this varies between species. So one type of flower might need 8 hours of darkness, and that's as long as it gets 8 hours of darkness, that's the critical night length, and then it'll flower. Some might need 9 hours, some might need 10 hours. So every plant species is different. So, let's go back to our notes, and that is the photoperiod. So back over here in our notes when we talked about the photoperiod, I'm going to put here as another example. Let's write this down so you can remember the long and short day plants. As well. Also, triggering behavior in migration could be food and water availability. So a lack of food and water due to either extreme temperatures, less precipitation, so we have maybe a dry season going on, or because of overcrowding. There's population pressure or an area reaching carrying capacity also spurs some animals to move. Do you guys recognize the word carrying capacity? Somebody want to share what that means? You know what that means, Savannah?
It's like the amount a certain environment can, like the resources in it, how much it can take care of.
That's right. That's right. So populations can grow and grow and grow until resources start to be limiting, and so then those numbers they kind of level off. So oftentimes, if you're looking over time, the number of individuals in the population, it can grow and grow and grow, but eventually we start to see it kind of level off like this. And that leveling off is called the carrying capacity. That's the number of organisms that the environment can support due to the resources. So the amount of food, space, and so on. Absolutely. So if the population is reaching carrying capacity, that means we're starting to get limited on the food sources, water sources, and so on, and that can trigger organisms to move in, inhabit a new area if they're able to. This is some wildebeest moving around for finding the watering holes and so on, so they migrate. All right, so that's our behavior due to environmental cues. What we're going to look at next is how organisms take cues from one another. So we're going to talk a little bit about how organisms communicate with one another. Question?
So humans don't have like a carrying capacity. We don't.
That's a good question. The question is about humans and our carrying capacity. We believe that there probably is a carrying capacity. We don't know what that is. I mean, there has to be. There's only a finite amount of space and resources here on Earth. But we don't know what that is. All right.
Super predict like 10 million.
Okay. So let's talk about communication between individuals. So we're going to talk about how different types of animals relay messages to one another. So signal is a behavior that causes a change in another animal's behavior, and communication is the transmission and reception of those signals. So you can have a signal and then you have to communicate it with another organism to change that other organism's behavior. So let's go through, we're going to go through some examples of animal communication and ways in which they can communicate. Animals can communicate using visual signals, chemical signals, we'll talk about those in a second, tactile, touching, electrical signals, and auditory, which is hearing. So I'm going to go through the example of fruit fly courtship. Because it has a lot of these different methods in one communication, and that is the male wanting to mate with a female. So what are the different communication things that needs to happen? All right, so the first thing, the male identifies the female of the same species and orients himself. Okay, so how does he know and how does he do that? So a couple of things. The first thing is chemical communication. You didn't know this about fruit flies. Female fruit flies exude a chemical. We'll talk about these chemicals called pheromones later on. If you get psychology, we've probably talked in length about these. So she has this chemical that goes into the air, diffuses into the air, where the fruit fly has receptors to respond to that particular chemical. So that's how he knows where she is, that she's part of his species, all right, and so on. So to confirm her identity. Then now that he has the chemical signal, he visually locates her, all right, and so he sees her and orients his body towards her. All right, so next, what does he do? He lets her know he's present. So how does he do that? He alerts the female to his presence. All right. So what he does, tactile communication. He just gently touches her. All right, then he serenades her. A courtship song to inform the female, he's communicating with her, of his species. Remember when we talked about speciation? And if females are choosing their mates, they look for specific behaviors and so on. And so he's alerting her to his species by singing the right song. But what he's actually doing with the singing of the song is he's doing auditory communication. And he actually begins to vibrate his wings, which is making the noise of the song. Okay?
Liam.
Tactile communication. Yeah, just
Answer yourself.
All right, and then he has done all these three things successfully. She will allow him to be children. All right, so he has to have all those communication things going on. All right.
You may proceed.
Actually, watching this, there is sometimes a little bit of chasing going around too. Like he has to run after her. All right. So here's the orienting. This little poof around here, those are the chemicals that she's exuding. All right, so he recognized that, finds her, orients himself. Here's the tapping of the leg, vibrating of the wings, and if he's successful. All right, so that's that. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. All right.
What is that?
All right. Honeybees. Another form of communication. This isn't with mating with the honeybees. This is, we're going to look at how honeybees communicate where food is. So a bee returning from the field performs a dance to communicate information about two things, about the distance and the direction of the food source. There are worker bees. Worker bees in a hive are female bees that they go out and they find pollen and bring the pollen back to the hive for food. So there are worker bees. There's a queen bee that stays in the hive. She's just kind of in charge. She's the one that has the babies, all right? And then you have the males, which are the drones. Their job, they're different than the worker bees. They don't actually go out and get the food. Their basic job is to mate with their queen, all right? So that's kind of the history there. So here we have our worker bees. Those are the females that go out and buzz around and they're looking for food. And when the worker bee finds food, they come back to the hive and they have to communicate to all the other worker bees where the food source is so that more worker bees can go out and get the food and bring the food back, and the food is pollen. And so what they do, it says here, if the worker bee, here's the hive, if the worker bee goes back and goes out and finds food very close to the hive, they come back to the hive and they do what's called a round dance. So they just kind of go in circles. When that's the case, then that tells the other bees that the food is really close to our hive. So the worker bees can go out and look right in the vicinity of the beehive. But it gets a little bit more complex when the food source is farther out. And so when they're farther out, the dance changes. They call this a waggle dance, all right? And so what happens, notice here, they make a figure 8 motion. So look at here, here's the bee. They have a center straight line. So the bee goes in a straight line, comes over here, goes in a straight line, comes down here. So there you have the figure 8, all right? And it's that tells the bees that it is farther away. That's different than the round dance. But the way that they do this also is going to tell the location of it compared to the sun. So before I talk more about these, I have a little video that I want to show you that illustrates this. Shows the bees.
They're really weird.
All right, so there we go.
The hive is hungry. Some 30,000 honeybees need pollen. Now, a single jar of the honey you can buy in any store requires 1 million flower visits. Scouts disperse several miles in each direction, searching for untapped fields. This scout makes a promising find. Pollen sacs bulge from her legs, but she can't harvest all of it herself. She needs help, lots of it. She spreads the news of her find by dancing. This waggle dance is based on a figure 8. The scout moves at an angle, waggles, reverses direction, and waggles some more. Her flower point presentation has to communicate 3 things. First, she moves at an angle. The angle indicates the direction of the flowers in relation to the sun. The hive's honeycombs are built vertically, so straight up means towards the sun, down means away from the sun, and so on. Second, distance. She waggles her abdomen rapidly. The more she waggles, the further the distance. Third, flower type. The pollen she collected provides a scent cue for the others to smell for. Her presentation is a success. Several sisters return with her to forage in the field. They in turn will bring back more pollen and spread the word until the hive is finally full.
All right, so let's see how that relates to this picture.
Like it's kind of a democracy. Like they'll have different bees doing different dances for different food sources, and the more bees that are doing that dance.
Let me finish this. All right, so if we look at this, this is, as I said in the video, the combs are vertical. So what happens here is so we think of this as a vertical, straight up. When the bee moves straight up, it means that when they go out of the hive, they're moving directly towards the sun. And so notice here's food source A. All right, so a bee coming back to the hive to communicate where food source A is here's the vertical here. Notice that the head is pointing this way, so the bee is wagging, doing the waggle, moving up on there and doing that figure 8 dance. And so therefore, what that does is because she is moving up, it tells the bees when they leave that you need to go directly towards the sun. So it's telling you the direction, all right? And then how much she waggles can tell you distance. And then remember, she had the pollen sacs on there. They smell that, and that gives them an idea of what flower they're looking for, and so on and so forth. They can use that sense as well. So then notice here, bee. Bee is, when you go out of the beehive, is in the opposite direction of the location of the sun. So notice here, she's moving down. So she's moving down, and it says, oh, I need to go in the opposite direction. See, notice that here it's in the direction of the sun, but it's not directly towards. It moves over 30 degrees. So notice here, here's the vertical. The straight line is moving up towards the sun, but 30 degrees, all right, and so on and so forth. So that's where the bees know where to go, all right? And this is where to stop.